victims' intranet pages and surf on the intranet from remote. How this works is that most browsers have a way of preventing or enforcing the same origin policy by a method called DNS pinning. DNS pinning means that whenever a domain is resolved to its IP address, the IP address remains in the cache of the browser, and even though the domain has a short time to live and the IP address for the domain is updated, the browser still uses the old IP address in order to enforce the same origin policy. There's one small trick that enables the attacker, however, to circumvent this DNS pinning, and it's called anti-DNS pinning, surprisingly, which works like this. First, the user requests a page from www.attacker.com or whatever, which can be also a page that has been taken over by an attacker, any compromised website, any web page from a company that wants to harm his customers, whatever. The DNS server returns the IP address for this domain, and the browser makes a request to the IP address and loads the page. The page does nothing else but request itself again a couple of seconds later. In the meantime, however, the DNS server changes the IP address for the domain. For example, to something local like 197.168.1.1. Let's just say the intranet is located there. So when the page reloads itself, for example via JavaScript, the browser, due to DNS pinning, requests the old IP address. However, the attacker in the meantime closed the HTTP port on the old IP address, which can be, for example, done via dynamically created IP tables rules, so that exactly one IP address isn't allowed to get on the HTTP port anymore. And when the browser can't reach the HTTP port of the old IP address, he's going to refresh the IP address. The refreshed IP address is now the local IP address from the intranet. The browser requests www.attacker.com, thinks it's still the old site within the internet somewhere, but in reality it is located on the intranet. Using JavaScript or cross-site scripting, the attacker can now read the content of the intranet and send it via JavaScript to his server and have a look at all the intranet pages that are located at the client side. So this can be exploited. As I said, just place the according scripts on any arbitrary server, and anyone who surfaces this web page has his intranet read if the attacker knows the IP address of the intranet. You can also port scan the intranet using cross-site scripting or JavaScript simply by loading images from various ports of internal IP addresses. Via JavaScript, the attacker has to measure the time, how long it took the browser to issue an error message. If it takes very long, he knows the port has been is closed. If there is a fast error, the attacker knows either it is an HTTP port and the image didn't exist there, or alternatively the port is open but it's not an HTTP server, then the error message also comes pretty fast. There's actually quite a difference, a number of seconds, so it's pretty easy to tell if a port is open or closed. Another classic is the cross-site scripting phishing. If anyone finds a cross-site scripting vulnerability on a banking site, JavaScript can be used via, for example, document.write to exchange large parts of the site. One trick, for example, is to simply change the action tag of the login form or the action parameter of the login form. So when a user enters his account number and his PIN to log into his online banking account, instead of sending it to the banking server, it is sent to a server from the attacker, and this doesn't even require to take over some sessions or something like that, but instead the real account number and the PIN in clear text is sent to the attacker. One way that we are going to talk about now a little bit longer is remotely controlling the victim's browser. We had the idea that it would be great to make a JavaScript malware, something like a Trojan horse, which is implemented in JavaScript and which infects the user whenever he surfaces a page where the JavaScript is loaded. All the information that the user does during his session in the browser should be logged and sent to the server. So using such a malware, it would be possible to, for example, log the key presses that were done in the window, steal all the cookies, and even have a look at the pages the victim is surfing on. This is possible because the power of JavaScript. JavaScript has a lot of features that can be exploited for such an attack by any attacker. For example, there's event handlers. You all know in your HTML, you always have these on click, on key press, on error, on whatever, on load. There's lots of event handlers, and you can all catch them. So whenever, for example, someone makes a click somewhere in the window, this can be recorded via JavaScript. And then in turn sent back to the server in order to follow the user. It is also possible to remotely control the browser. There's nothing more simple than just setting the location of the browser to any arbitrary page. So whenever a user is infected by this malware, you can just send him to any location he wants. And as the JavaScript is loaded on the page the victim visits, the same origin policy is completely circumvented. This makes it on the one hand possible to access the cookies because JavaScript can only access cookies from the domain where the JavaScript is loaded from, and on the other hand, via history.back, the attacker can even read the browser history, at least of the domain from where the JavaScript was loaded. Okay, so when we had this idea to write some JavaScript malware, at first we did some requirements engineering. What should such a malware be able to do? The first thing is the most important, but as we're going to see, not quite so simple requirement is that once a victim visits a web page that contains the JavaScript, the web browser should become infected. And at least during the session while the user browses in this single window without changing the address bar, the malware shall remain active. Another requirement, which is basically clear but is not so simple sometimes, is that the JavaScript that is used should be cross-browser compatible. Actually, JavaScript should be standardized, but it isn't. There's a lot of exceptions. There's some bugs in some browsers that need to be circumvented. So this was one of the requirements that was pretty hard to find out what browser requires what special treatment. A very easy requirement is that all cookies that are set on the victim should be sent to the attacker. This is the classical document.cookie exploit, usually done via cross-site scripting. A little bit more complicated and also a little bit more fun is key presses should be intercepted and locked. So whenever the user enters his username and his password, all the keys are pressed, or whenever a key is pressed, an event handler is called, and this event handler should lock all the keys and send them again to the attacker, which makes it actually useless to steal the cookies, because if you have the username and the password, you don't need the cookies any longer, because the cookies are or the session ID is restricted to a session, and using the username and password you can log in whenever you want. All right, now a rather hard requirement also was that the malware should be able to work across links on the same domain, which is clear. This is a very important requirement because otherwise the malware would be just active on the first page, and whenever the user clicks another link, the malware wouldn't be active again. So it was clear that it is required that while the user surfs on one domain, the malware needs to remain active. Another hard requirement was that the malware should be able to work across domains. So even when the user leaves his current domain, for example, he's surfing on www.decker.com, and he goes to another page, say Microsoft.com, the malware should remain in the background and still keep sending all the information to the attacker. Of course, we want to do remote shoulder surfing. That means that, shoulder surfing, someone is surfing his browser and you're looking above his shoulder, what he's looking at, perhaps reading his emails and something like that. You should be able to do this with JavaScript malware too, but not only a couple of centimeters behind him, but rather a couple of 100 kilometers away via cross-site scripting or JavaScript. And finally, it should be possible to remotely control infected browsers. All right, so now let's come to the implementation. We actually implemented an alpha version of this JavaScript malware. I'm going to show you something of it at the end of the presentation. But let's just first have a look how we did it, what problems we had to implement such a system. Well, as I already said, to get the victim infected is not as easy as it sounds. The beginning is pretty simple. You need to load some JavaScript. For example, we placed a JavaScript, xt.js on a server, and all you need to inject into the client are these short tags. And this makes the victim load the JavaScript and become infected. Now, the problem is that we want to have it client-server based, so that the server is able to send commands to the client. Problem is, this is not the way the HTTP protocol works, because normally only the client can initiate connections to the server. It's not possible for an HTTP server to request something from a client. So the solution is actually pretty simple, and I think the only one that is possible, namely polling. Every couple of seconds, the victim pulls JavaScript from the client, and if there is something for the client to do, the server changes the JavaScript that is pulled from the server, and the client does whatever the server tells him. Commands that can be executed might be, for example, execute some JavaScript on the client, tell the client to display an alert box showing you have been owned or whatever. Get me my cookies, get me my key presses, or I want to see what you're currently looking at. In order to handle multiple clients, of course it should be possible. You want to infect not only one client and control him, but you want to infect quite a number of clients. Basically, this can be anything and is dependent on how much traffic there is on the web page that has been compromised via cross-site scripting. It is required to have a unique ID in order to identify the clients. Okay, the next requirement, all cookies sent to the client while infected should be intercepted. This is basically a very easy one. Next time the client pulls from the server, just tell the client to send top get outer window document cookie to the sender. Get outer window is actually a custom function we implemented. It does nothing else but go through all the frames. There may be stacked frames, and in order to get the cookies from the top window, so to say, we just use this function. And then send the cookies to the server so that he can have a look at it. A little bit more tricky is, as I already mentioned, logging the key presses. In theory, we would have to put on key press handlers on anything. on form tags and whatever. But luckily, there's a great feature in HTML, namely on key press can be added to the body tag. And then whenever within the window someone presses a key, the key press is locked simply with one usage of the event handler. So we get the